Oh wow, these little dot islands covered in sea lions. Listen to that. It's early in the morning in the middle of June, and I'm on a research boat deep in the wilds of southeast Alaska. Right in front of me is a small island, and it's heaving with a colony of noisy Steller sea lions. They're like the size of a big bear, some of these big males. One of them there looks like Jabba the Hutt. They're all over each other, lolling in the sun on a big smooth rock. All around me is classic Alaska. Big mountains draped with wisps of moist clouds, frothing creeks that pour down to long ocean fjords, coniferous forests in every direction, ancient, unchanged. But sometimes, Alaska is not what it seems. The landscape looks so old it seems like it's been here forever, but the scene I'm looking at has not always looked like this. No, all this is new. Just 200 years ago, it was a very different scene. I'd literally be under 1 mile of ice. A giant glacier, standing a mile thick, 20 miles wide, and nearly 100 miles long north to south.
The ice came clear out in here to icy straits where we're looking clear across the Chichagof Island in the distance.
There was almost no life to be seen here. No sea lions, no puffins, no bears. But then, the ice melted. And as it travelled northwards, it created all this new habitat for all these animals, like the sea lions here, and the whales that are in the sea, and the wolves and bears that are up the creeks, and the salmon that come back every year. It's just a place that's coming to life as the ice disappears. And in its place is this saltwater bay that I'm on, 65 miles long, and home to countless species in Glacier Bay National Park. A dramatic corner of the world that's famous for its incredible abundance of life. What happened between the ice melting and all this life magically appearing is a dream story for me as an ecologist, because the problem with studying ecology, how all the species arrive and interact in an ecosystem, is that you don't often have a clean slate to start from, or the time to watch it unfold. But here, when the glaciers began melting naturally before humans sped up climate change, they left behind a clean slate for nature to show us the steps she takes to build a flourishing ecosystem, starting with nothing but rocks and meltwater. It gave scientists an opportunity to watch life emerge in real time and track the step-by-step return of plants and animals in a thing ecologists call succession. So over the next few days, I'm going to cover 300 miles by boat, on foot, and in waders to 2 rivers that flow into Glacier Bay to see just how incredibly fast biodiversity can build when nature is left to it in the surprising spectacle of life after ice. From KUOW in Seattle and Chris Morgan Wildlife, welcome to the wild. Here in the panhandle of southeast Alaska, ice has come and gone naturally many times over millennia. The most recent, the Little Ice Age, only just ended in the 1700s. To set the stage of this dynamic place, it really helps to look at it through the people who've lived alongside that ice for thousands of years. Okay, grey salt and pepper beard we're looking for. 4 clans of the Huna Tlingit tribe call this part of Alaska home. The guy I'm looking for, Don Starbard, belongs to one of them, the Seagull clan. I've had trouble getting in touch with Don, so I've spent the last couple of hours wandering around asking locals if they know him, and what he looks like. Salt and pepper beard, and a leather vest with a seagull on it. Oh, okay, there's a salt and pepper kind of guy. And his vest. Excuse me, are you Don?
I'm Don.
Don.
How do you know?
Somebody told me to look for your vest.
Oh,
I'm Chris. I've been trying to reach you this morning.
Oh,
it's so nice to meet you. We settle into a spot overlooking the bay. We can't see any icebergs right now, but Don, he also goes by Wakish, remembers a time when thousands of them dotted the bay.
We revere the ice. We even call the icebergs up the bay Chukanshaws and refer to them as our ancestors. It's always been a part of us. We live up here in icy straits, Glacier Bay. We've always had the ice.
Ice is in the Huna Tlingit's blood. They've seen it advance and retreat many times, melting and refreezing. When Wakish was growing up, the Little Ice Age was just a distant memory. Tribal elders shared old stories about what life was like before the glaciers arrived.
We were a wealthy native tribe. We had put up food all summer, and now in the winters we had time. We had sheltered houses. We knew how to build plank houses and were warm. So we could carve, we could tell stories. Our culture advanced more than a lot of other tribes that were more day-to-day survival year-round.
It's surprising because everyone in the world would picture Alaska. Oh, brutal place to live, right? You know, but you make it sound like such a life of plenty, right? And then
it really is.
Winters of holing up and enjoying the fruits.
You got it. That's when we kuik. The celebration, and Tlingits love the kuik. We dance. Our kuiks may start at noon and go for 3 or 4 days.
What?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, you sleep when you can, but you come back, you bring food, you drum, and if you can feed your clan, you are a good leader. And we actually say that about our food isn't food until it's shared.
Several clans of the Huna Tlingit flourished here till nearly 300 years ago, until they had a violent meeting with fate. It was the year 1750, and a massive surge of ice suddenly descended from the north.
Our clan lived on the outer coast, the Seagull people, Ducktane-Tons, and the 3 Eagle clans lived here in the Glacier Bay area. And there was a glacier that sat up 20, 30 miles above the villages here, and it all of a sudden started advancing and drove out the Eagle villages here.
This huge sheet of ice pushed south from the mountains, shaving off trees at the base and pushing the Tlingit people out of their homes onto neighbouring islands.
And they had to resettle somewhere, and they tried several places out where we're looking now in icy straits. And they finally settled in what is now Huna. Hunya means sheltered from the north wind. It was very cold back then.
The glacier smothered the villages and bulged right out into the ocean. The people and the animals fled, forced to find new village sites. There's a telling sign at the entrance to the village of Huna that reads, "Settled 1752, right after that ice surge." But then, as quickly as it had arrived, the glacier and all the ice here began to melt. It receded towards the north, leaving behind land scoured clean by the grinding ice and the beginnings of a long, narrow bay, Glacier Bay.
And as soon as it receded up and started making a bay again, our people started coming up and hunting and fishing and gathering. And we thought, the world's getting better again.
So the Huna Tlingit people moved back onto their homelands. There were a few seals for them to hunt, the odd seabird, and some fish. But the land was mostly barren. Their resilience kept them here, a part of the fabric of this ever-changing place. And with the land devoid of life, nature had to start from scratch. In the 200 years plus since then, she's done a pretty remarkable job of it. Around here, you don't get far without a boat. Pretty ironic, really, given the whole place started as ice. Thank you very much. Oh, it's going to be cosy in here.
Nice day.
Glacier Bay is one of the most remote national parks in the US, but it's not without its visitors. In the distance I can see a giant cruise ship carrying about 3,000 passengers. That's how 9 out of 10 people who come here see the place, but not us. I'm donning my waders, about to jump off the National Park Service research boat we've taken to the south end of the long Glacier Bay Fjord, where the story of melting ice begins. It's been a short 30-minute run to the mouth of a river.
I'm going to do a non-elegant exit.
That's Dr. Megan Clark. She's leading our journey into the history of this river.
Oh yeah, starfish. Yeah.
Oh, nice. That's brilliant. Going to touch bottom there. All right.
Nice to meet you, sir. And Rob will talk at 2.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
See you later. Great day.
Thanks so much. Our connection to civilization drops us off on a beach by the river mouth. And suddenly the feeling of isolation becomes very real.
Just quiet and not a soul around suddenly.
So this is the oldest stream, so this is the one that's been ice-free in Glacier Bay the longest in terms of the more recent Little Ice Age deglaciation.
Megan is a hydrologist at the University of Leeds in England. I'm here with her and her colleague, Dr. Mark Smith. They're a long way from home, but they know this creek very well. The area of science they study is called fluvial geomorphology.
My mom's really cute. I told her that I look at fluvial geomorphology, and she always explains to people, and she goes, fluvial geomorphology.
Oh.
You know, she's got it down rote. It's really cute.
Megan studies how rivers change their shape and characteristics over time.
So fluvial meaning,
River,
and
flowing,
then geo meaning,
earth, yeah.
and then
Form.
morphologist meaning.
Yeah, form. Yeah.
Right.
Megan has come to Glacier Bay's rivers every few years since 2006 because she's part of a long lineage of scientists who've been sampling and monitoring the changes in them for many decades. Almost everything that flows here started as a trickle from the snout of a melting glacier, but today it's full of life. Megan's looking at the science of how this ecological succession happens.
That's the direction of the creek, is it? Up between?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly, yeah.
We're entering Rush Point Creek, one of the more mature rivers in the study. Scientists know that because it's located at the bottom end of Glacier Bay, and that giant mile-thick glacier melted here before anywhere else, freeing up the first trickles of water to flow through the barren landscape.
And what does that put it at? Like how old?
It's about 210, 215.
215 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
We don't usually think of rivers as being born, then slowly aging, but just like people, that's what they do. The Colorado River is at least 6 million years old, so in the grand scheme of things, 200 years is young for a river. But in the scheme of Glacier Bay, this river is old and wise. There are tall trees growing on either side of the river. I can already see how nature has had time to thrive here. I'm excited to be here with Megan and Mark because they're part of a kind of a human succession too, beginning with the Huna Tlingit, who later helped John Muir understand the glaciers in 1879, followed by a whole string of scientists who've become obsessed with Glacier Bay. In 1916, a botanist, William Cooper, arrived and realised it was a perfect place to watch how pioneering plants colonise after a glacier has melted. He then helped it become a park. And in the 70s, an Englishman named Professor Sandy Milner arrived to study how streams evolve here. Sandy's been here nearly every year since. It's become the longest-running research project in the park. And Megan was Sandy's student, and now she's a professor herself.
Keeping these data sets up, because Sandy started it, the year I was born, which I think is a crazy coincidence as well.
All this research has put Glacier Bay firmly on the map as the capital of the world for studies on this fascinating thing called ecological succession. It's become known as a living laboratory. We're carrying our backpacks with food, water, and some of the research gear these guys use. Tape measures, test tubes, surveying poles, something that looks like a fishing net. Stuff they use to collect data to track the step-by-step changes that an ecosystem undergoes over time. The best place to observe succession happening is somewhere where life is just beginning, where species are just arriving, sometimes one by one. When Mount St. Helens blew in Washington State, it was one of those places. The volcano obliterated everything, and ecologists had a great time watching nature start over. It's the same here, but instead of a volcano, it was millions of tons of ice. Ideally, you also need a location that's remote, not many people to disturb nature's comeback. Yep, we are very much on our own. In fact, these scientists have probably spent more time at this river than anyone since before the Little Ice Age. It's definitely not on the tourist route.
It's just really nice to have this location that you kind of feel is, a little piece that nobody else has really ever experienced.
Yeah. To get to Megan's sampling locations, we walk upstream in our fishing waders in the middle of the river, waist high in the flowing water. It's actually easier than trying to bushwhack our way through the shrubby trees that line the bank. I notice Megan's eyes are everywhere, looking for any changes in the ecosystem since her last visit, and also looking for something else.
Hey, bear!
Hey, bear!
This area is bear central. Both grizzlies and black bears now call this home since the ice melted. There are fresh tracks everywhere in the sand, so we make lots of noise over the sound of the creek. Bears don't like to be surprised.
Sandy has this great story of bushwhacking and going along through the alder, and then suddenly they all looked back and the bear was just trotting along behind them.
Yeah.
Thanks for clearing the way.
The sand is soft under our waders, and pebbles roll around our feet. You get the feeling Rush Point Creek has mellowed quite a bit since it first melted from the ice 2 centuries ago. In less than 50 yards, we come across our first sign from the past.
Oh, look at that. How fascinating.
Something called an interstadial stump. It's the remnant of a tree that grew here before the ice covered the place. The diameter of the stump is way bigger than the young trees around us. It's almost 3 feet wide.
These are like prehistoric beings in some ways.
Yeah.
Glaciers have come and gone through this area multiple times in history. One of them surged through this valley and sheared this tree off at the base, like a wire through cheese. But its strong roots stayed here, anchored deep in the ground. Now the ice is gone, but the tree stumps are still here, in the river. Sometimes there are whole forests of them.
Like, when might this have been a sapling? Just wild guess.
I think probably, up to 10,000 years ago. Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And that it is still sitting here in the river.
And it's just slowly getting uncovered.
Some people call them witness trees for everything they've seen. I'm sure they have stories. Mark, Megan's research partner, chips in.
It's like an echo of the past. It might have been erased by the glacier, but there's something still there poking out from underneath. And then the landscape, the whole landscape, acts just like that. It's layer upon layer of process, of complexity, of landforms. And if you've got an eye for it, you can see echoes of the past in that way.
10,000-year-old stumps in a river that's only 200 years old. You can feel the ebb and flow in this mind-bending place. And now that the ice has gone, it's the rivers, like this one, that have become the main agents of change. We reach a spot on the river that's marked on Megan's GPS. Every time one of the researchers gets to this exact location, out comes some curious-looking gear.
This server net, so it's got a metal frame. And it's
Time for some sampling. Megan pulls out a big metal frame she's been schlepping up the river and puts me to work.
And then we'll start to disturb the sediment, rub over the rocks so that any invertebrates or anything living under or on the rocks will get washed away into this net that is attached to the frame. And then we have a little cap at the end of that net which will collect all the invertebrates, and we'll put them in a bag and preserve them with some alcohol and then be able to look at them in the lab later.
Very cool. It looks like something from the medieval ages, like a torture.
I was just saying, it's probably from 1990s. It's like, I've known this net a long time now.
Really? Very back in history with this whole place.
So I'm going to put this down on the ground, and then you'll just put one foot on either side and use my back to kind of keep yourself steady if you need to as well.
Okay,
so
where are you going to be?
I'm going to be this end, you're going to be that end.
Okay.
It's a pretty funny scene considering we just met. I'm pinning the net frame down underwater with my feet, wobbling over Megan, hanging onto her shoulder straps, and she's bent down in front of me, moving rocks around to catch any insects that wash free into the net.
We're just sort of disturbing the sediments and getting into those interstitial particle places to make sure we get all of them.
Interstitial, what does that mean? What's that?
In between.
In between. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. And being a scientist, you can't just say in between.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Then the whole public would know.
Then she shakes the sediment, creatures and all, out of the net into a little plastic bag that's carefully labelled.
Alright, so we've got the bag.
Location, date, creek name.
So you can see that's a mayfly.
Oh,
Two
wow.
mayflies you can see there.
What are you hoping for? What's the dream in here?
Well, sometimes you do get like fish, little juvenile fish.
Huh.
But really it's just very small mayflies, chironomids and different beasties like that.
Right. What's a chironomid?
It's a non-biting fly.
Okay.
Good ones, rather than the biting flies.
I see. And why are those important here? Or are they important?
Really important because they're one of the first macroinvertebrate species that arrive to the streams, and they're forming the base of the food web for fish and other invertebrates. So I'll just grab the bag.
The samples, these important little building blocks of the ecosystem, all go back to the lab for analysis. Which species of river bugs are here now? How many? They compare the findings to the data they got 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 50 years ago, tracking every change. The presence or absence of each species builds a picture of life taking a hold. And it's not just in the river this has been done. On the river banks, a whole other world of plant life has taken a hold. 200-year-old Rush Point Creek is a bit like the end result of ecological succession. It's mature, braided and gentle. There are trees and shrubs and aquatic creatures. But to really find out how it got this way, we need to see the young creek that taught scientists how little bugs in a river and tiny plants on the banks eventually turn into salmon, bears, moose, wolves and forests. All that after the break. We started out this morning on the boat at the bottom of Glacier Bay, the southern end, and we've now travelled north. It's dawn the next day, and we're hurtling up the narrow bay northwards. We've left our older Rush Point Creek behind. Now Megan and Mark want to show me a young river, one that was still a glacier only 70 years ago, because it allows us to kind of travel back in time to understand how it started out in life. To get there, we're following the same path the melting glacier took as it retreated up Glacier Bay over the last 250 years. Our boat's cruising pretty fast, about 30 miles an hour, and the land is getting younger as we go north. It's a very strange feeling. We're watching the succession of nature in reverse, like going back in time. I'm following a map on my GPS, and there are marks on it that show where the glacier was at different points back in history.
So we just passed the point where the glacier was in 1860.
Here's where John Muir built his cabin in 1879. Back then the glacier reached up to here.
And we're approaching 1892. Pretty close together.
As we eat up the miles, I can feel the temperature dropping closer to the icy north, and it really does look like the landscape is getting younger, more primeval.
All right, we're getting close now. This is the 1907 glacier mark. Getting closer and closer to current day. Just over 100 years ago, this is where the glacier was. It's like being in a time machine.
The trees are getting smaller, and there's more low tundra and shrubs. And the rivers up here are just toddlers, because they haven't had time to flourish yet after being locked up as ice. They're still steep-sided and fast-flowing. Glaciers are melting all over the world, and this bay gives us a close-up of what's likely to happen next. I feel like I'm inside the pages of a textbook on succession, immersive learning at its best.
We're heading to a creek, and it's perhaps one of the most well-studied creeks on Earth. It goes down in history, this place.
It's about 3 hours since we left the boat dock in the south, but we're here, just a few miles from where the glacier is now, at a young creek that feels like hallowed ground. It's called Wolf Point Creek.
Absolutely enchanted. Completely different characteristics to the other place.
Yeah, so I'm really excited that you guys are getting to see the difference between the oldest and the youngest that we're studying.
Yeah.
You can tell right away that this stream is different from yesterday at Rush Point Creek. You can hear it. It's hurrying, full speed, a steady roar of waves, young and angry.
So in this younger one, I'm definitely seeing that it's much faster flows. I mean, you can hear that it's much faster and it's got these broken waves. And so that's really indicative of these really much bigger cobbles, if not boulders, kind of dominating this area.
Oh, totally is, yes. It's just a river of rocks here.
Yeah.
Whereas we were sinking down to our ankles into sediment yesterday.
Exactly.
At the older creek yesterday, it was easy to walk up the middle of the river through the slow water and calm pools, through mud and silt. But here, it's a battle against the flow.
So this is the test. How deep is it? And can we use the stream or alderbash? So
Attempt to walk up the stream or bushwhack through the alder thicket on the bank. Stream first. We all link arms to steady ourselves.
How do you want to do it? Individually or chain it?
That seems like a good idea. It's a bit swift, isn't it? It's amazing the power of water, isn't it?
yeah.
1.5 feet, 2 feet of it, and it can knock you off and carry you downstream.
An hour in, we've covered less than a mile and my legs are burning, pushing one grueling step after another against the flow. The stream gets too deep, past our waists, so we hoist ourselves up onto the bank to bushwhack through the jungle-like vegetation on the riverbank. Not so much welcome to the jungle, but welcome to the alder. This is one of the main characters in this story of early succession that we've come to see. Picture this spot when it started out in the 1950s, just a jumble of ice and rocks that slowly becomes a dripping glacier and then a little creek. Sandy Milner started documenting it in the 70s. In the river, a bit of hardy algae showed up and clung to the rocks. It provided food for those midges to come in. The midges then became food for little fish that birds and small mammals could eat. On the riverbank, lichen spores blew in on the wind, or maybe travelled on the feet of birds. The spores landed on a rock, and its acids sort of dissolved the rock, creating soil. Mosses can take root in the soil. And then a pioneering little plant called dryas comes along. It can grow in really harsh conditions and creates a kind of living carpet for the next arrivals to take a hold. Those are fireweed, tiny willows, and then alder, the dense shrubby tree we're in now. It's all a little bit like the HBO show Succession. These species are all about jostling for position, grappling for control.
So alder's very good at germinating in these sort of conditions and then also spreading very quickly.
Alders are one of those special plants that help other plants, like a bit of a middleman. Nitrogen is essential for all life. Plants need it to grow, but most of them can't access it easily. There's plenty of it floating around in the air as a gas, but you need a certain type of plant to grab it from the air and make it available in the soil as a nutrient. It's called nitrogen fixing, and alder is very good at it.
And then once it's fixing and creating these nutrients in the soil, other species are able to come along and make the most of its hard work and start to use that itself.
Like piggybacking on the alder.
Exactly.
Bears use alder thickets too, for shade and cover. Plus, it gives insects habitat, stabilises the riverbanks, keeps the water cool for any fish that show up. We come around a bend in the river, and Megan and Mark come across something else, another new feature of the creek.
Well, I never. This is it.
Is it?
Completely different.
For the first time we're seeing this large bit of wood in the channel, and 5 years ago we didn't see anything that big in the channel.
Since Megan and Mark were last here 5 years ago, a huge tree has fallen across the stream from one side to the other. It's a cottonwood, a big tree that comes next in the succession after the alder. Its giant root wad has been upended and is surrounded by sediment crumbling down the bank. To the untrained eye, fallen trees in a creek might look like a bit of a mess, but to Megan and Mark, it's good news, another data point to map, because it shows that trees are not just appearing and growing through succession, but falling down, decomposing, becoming part of the ecosystem, and even altering the flow of the river. And all of this habitat biodiversity makes new homes for more species biodiversity.
That's a big tree. What will this do to the river?
So it'll be really, really good. So this is exactly what we're looking for. Just because of how big it is and because it spans all the way across, it's going to be slowing that water flow and forcing a lot of that flow into the stream bed. And it's going to start to rack a lot of wood that's coming from further up.
Right, it's like a bottleneck for all of that stuff upstream. It all sort of gets trapped on it. And then the river has to work around it at some point, I suppose.
It is.
It's wood that makes the creek slow down in some spots and speed up in others. It creates new habitat, deep pools and mini cascades, silt and mud. Twigs and logs are a landing spot for mosses and algae. So wood is crucial for creating the complexity that life in the creek needs. Mark pulls out an iPad and walks around the whole downed cottonwood tree with it, sloshing in and out of the water. He's creating a digital 3D model showing every contour of the wood to add to the database of evolving habitat here.
We're taught at school to think of rivers as this nice meandering corridor, right? It's nice and clean, it's nice and clear cut, banks, the river stays in the banks, it's all very nice and serpentine like a snake. When in truth, we've got to learn to embrace messy rivers and the fact that they should have stuff in them like this. It's the range of things in there, the diversity that creates the life. And a different range of species can enjoy a different range of niches all within the same river.
As the wood breaks up the flow, creating little ponds and eddies, other bigger animals start to show up.
I just noticed a big pile of fish bones on the side of the river. Big pile, really dense, all the vertebrate and fish bones mixed in there, and it's in all bear scat.
Yeah.
And it just reminds you, it's not just what's in the river, it's the creatures that are next to the river and crossing the river and eating from the river, isn't it? It's like this whole system that's relying on this bit of water.
The insects in the river, the alders, the wood creating habitat, all paved the way for a massive tipping point here in Wolf Point Creek. And that pile of bear poop full of fish bones is the clue. Salmon. But of course, they weren't always here. This creek is new, so they had to arrive at some point. It's a remarkable story, and Professor Sandy Milner was here to document it. So, he was here to see the midges arrive in 1977. Then, about a decade later, he saw something really surprising. Salmon. About 100 of them. A few adventurous, pioneering pink salmon had somehow found the new creek and chosen to spawn here instead of the river where they were born. 10 years after that, the number had exploded to 10,000 returning salmon. And here's the thing, the salmon die after they spawn, and their bodies are packed with nitrogen that becomes like a fertilizer for the whole ecosystem, especially when bears drag them off into the woods to eat. This huge new influx of nitrogen means the trees grow faster, and the salmon provide food and nutrients for countless other species, from worms and fungi to wolverines, huckleberries, wolves and weasels.
And the river is bringing all those different nutrients and those food sources to so many different species and supports so much biodiversity that might not be here if it weren't for the streams sort of developing and becoming more complex and then getting more species living in them.
It feels a bit counterintuitive, celebrating what's unfolded after a glacier melts. But remember, here it started naturally, and really does highlight how every change in nature creates an opportunity. Life is always waiting in the wings, ready to pounce.
I just love the way that the landscape's changing here, and it's sort of a story of birth and something new happening that's positive. So many changes in the environment are negative, right? And of course this is related to a retreating glacier that's built into bigger narratives, but just thinking about the terrestrial landscape here and the rebirth of the vegetation, it's a nice story to see the birth of these river systems and how they're growing old over time.
Way off to my right, through that channel, those are the Indian Islands, and you go through that channel, and that's the wide open ocean, and that's my Ducting Ton, my territory, my ancestors. We come from that area.
The Huna Tlingit have seen a lot of change in this dynamic corner of the world. Sometimes it was nature, sometimes other things. After that big ice surge pushed them out of their communities 300 years ago, they came back, only to be evicted again, this time by the American government when they decided to make Glacier Bay a park.
And then in my era, law enforcement showed up and our people were literally cut off from our homeland. Commercial fishing got cut off, and us coming into the bay to harvest things traditionally was stopped. And one of my classmates, he actually was arrested for shooting a seal for, potlatch purposes, and it actually made national headlines.
The relationship became very strained.
When I was a kid, the National Park Service was a dirty word. It was a nasty, a lot of, us being cut out from all our things was volatile.
But things have slowly begun to change as the Park Service starts to embrace the long Native American cultural history here. Waukesha has watched the relationship between the tribe and the park begin to thaw.
And since in the 1990s especially, and into the 2000s, they came across the waters and started talking, asking, how can we work together? What can we do?
In 2016, the Huna Tlingit and the Park Service built a beautiful ceremonial ancestors' house near where the ancient villages had stood, complete with giant totem poles depicting the animals of Glacier Bay. Waukesha now even works for the park, and he's even more determined to help keep the Huna Tlingit stories alive.
I'm on their payroll, So they pay the rent, so to speak. But I wouldn't have taken this job if I didn't feel that they weren't sincere in what they're doing and working with us. So that what do I get out of it? I get the satisfaction that I think my children and their children are going to have more access than even I have, because it's going to keep developing in their homeland. It's more than just having a history book that says this was your homeland. So that's what I get out of it, is our future.
On my last day in Glacier Bay National Park, I'm staring at what's left of the ice, right at the very north of the bay, thinking about the ebb and flow of people and nature here. So we're at Marjorie Glacier now. It's beautiful, just breathtaking. This 200-foot wall of ice up into the sky. There's all kinds of shades of whites and greys and every hue of blue you can imagine on the ice. This crumbling cliff of ice could be the end of the little Ice Age story I've been following. But it's not done. The changes that have shaped Glacier Bay over the last 2 centuries are far from over. It doesn't feel static at all. It feels like it's changing quite a lot, quite dramatically. Every few seconds you can hear sounds and creaks and groans and cracks and explosions. You imagine a place like this to feel still, but it's really not. It's constantly changing, like nature itself. Glacier Bay is going to continue to have less and less ice. Today's changing climate will make sure of it.
We have many, many stories and oral history of surviving in an ice-filled country.
And how does it feel to be losing that ice?
I have mixed feelings. There's ebbs as well as flows. So my kids laugh at me. They say, "Dad, you're as old as the Ice Age," because I used to fish right out here, and icebergs would be coming out of Glacier Bay here. And I thought they'd be there forever, but I guess it's been many decades since an iceberg has made it out of Glacier Bay because of the global warming, the retreat of the glaciers.
It's incredible to think that even in Waukesha's lifetime there have been so many changes. Through time, the indigenous people here have confronted challenges and overcome them with a strength that seems well suited to life in Glacier Bay. Waukesha smiles gently as he thinks.
And then I look at the positive side and I see the recession, and I see the lichens and the mosses and the grasses start growing, and the alders and the spruce trees, and the moose come in, and the wolves, and on and on. So, there's not everything is negative. The good comes out of everything. The trees, the plants, the people, everything is constantly changing.
I've never seen such beautiful evidence for that. Honestly, stories of melting glaciers can seem so desperate because they represent climate change. But it's been so wonderful experiencing the twist on that. How glaciers here melted, naturally at first. How they became trickling creeks, then beautiful braided rivers thriving with so much life. All within just a couple of 100 years. It shows how creation follows destruction, how darkness is replaced by light. All the rivers end at the sea, where 2 worlds meet, freshwater and salt, and where nutrients are flushed into Glacier Bay to feed plankton, fish, birds, then whales. It's another immense explosion of plants and animals in the ever-unfolding natural order of things. Culminating in today's bewildering biodiversity of this park. 300 plant species, 40 mammal species, and 200 species of birds. And maybe it's here where nature reminds us, even in a land born from such extremes, there's always a way to start over in the messy, unpredictable journey of life. During my conversation with Wakish, he mentioned someone he wanted to thank.
I do want to shout out a deep respect for my clan leader, Kenny Grant, who had recent heart stroke, and they called his family in, and my thoughts are with him right now. I'm trying to carry on his love for our homeland and our people, and if I can do it just half as good as him, that'd mean a lot to me. So, Kenny Grant, love you.
Kenny Grant passed away in the summer of 2024. My thoughts go out to his family and all who knew him. A quick heads up to all you listeners who listen to The Wild on Spotify. We have a poll going on. Which national park episode was your favourite so far? Check it out and vote. Thanks so much. As always, there are some great photographs and clips from our journey through the national parks on Instagram at @TheWildPod and at Chris Morgan Wildlife. The Wild is a production of KUOW in Seattle and Chris Morgan Wildlife, with support from Wildlife Media. This show would not be possible without listener support. You can help us continue to create this special, immersive storytelling by donating to KUOW. Go to kuow.org/donate/thewild. Thank you. Our producer is Lucy Suchek, writing for this episode by Christopher Preston. Jim Gates is our editor. It's hosted, produced and written by me, Chris Morgan. Special thanks to Glacier Bay Lodge for letting us tag along on a boat ride up Glacier Bay to see Marjorie Glacier. A very special thank you for their kind financial support to Jill and Scott Walker, Rose Letwin, Ellen Ferguson, Anna Kimball, John Taylor, Paul Lister, Bob Yellowlees, Barbara Stallman and Barton Brooks. Our production team includes Roy Campanella III, April Craig, Marshall Eisen, Michaela Gianotti Boyle, Tatiana Latre, Matt Martin, Kara McDermott, Amelia Peacock, Darcy Riggin-Schmidt, Brendan Sweeney and Hans Twite. Our theme music is by Michael Parker. I'm Chris Morgan. Take care of yourselves and do what you can to take care of our beautiful planet and all the things it teaches us about succession and life. See you next time.